The evening grew long, and it looked like they were approaching the end of what needed to be transcribed. A tall stack of pages had manifested as a result of their work, and it was something that would probably take 2 or 3 weeks for Ludmilla to study properly. The routes between the dwarven cities were due to be employed in a week's time, and Lady Shiltir seemed to have put the most thought into them. There was little Ludmilla could contribute there, especially considering she had no knowledge of the Dwarven Kingdom and their lands. The last point to visit was the prospective route to the imperial capital of Arwinter. There's so much traffic to Arwinter that even frost dragon flights are a drop in the ocean by comparison, Ludmilla noted. Yes, despite that, I decided it would be a good idea to connect the imperial capital, Lady Shiltir replied. We should be able to get an idea of how things are out there as well. Considering what we've discussed today, I feel that the only role that the route to Arwinter would serve at this point is for express freight and high-security shipments. Even a formation of their air cavalry cannot contend with an adult frost dragon if we get some equipment on them. Isn't that a problematic stance to take with a client state? If something is smuggled into their cargo, we will be using the military aviary there, so if anyone manages to get it past all that, it's the Empire's fault. Once it's airborne, it's our problem and they would dare not provoke us after the fact. I assume we would still cooperate if there is sufficient justification provided for an inspection, Ludmilla said. Having something undesirable come across the border might result in problems that could have been averted. We will investigate it on our end if we receive such a request, Lady Shiltir said. If it's something potentially hazardous, we will investigate it en route ourselves as well. The Ministry of Transportation is a national department of the Sorceress Kingdom. Lines must be drawn to define the relationship between us and our client states. I do not intend for our officials to be belligerent or abrasive when it comes to these matters, but there should never be a case where anyone from the Empire perceives that they have authority over our agents. I understand, Ludmilla made an additional note. Hopefully no one tries to put on airs or push their luck when it comes to their expectations involving the service. Then again, I can't imagine that anyone would try to pick a fight with our staff. Lady Shiltir flipped through to the next page of the notepad, which was entirely blank. It appeared that they had completed what they had set out to accomplish for the day. Ludmilla began to gather the loose documents on the table. This gives me quite a lot to study, she said. I will send word for my household to investigate the cargo rates in Erantal while I slip in what I can between my duties here. When I'm in the city, I will see what I can learn from Liane about how the transportation business works. Are you not interested in including Warden's Vale as a destination for the Frost Dragons? Lady Shiltir asked. Ludmilla's hands slowed as she rolled up the extra maps that Lady Shiltir had provided for her. I'm too small for that, aren't I? You're planning quite a lot of expansion, weren't you? Lady Shiltir tilted her head. How many per village was it again? Roughly 200 to 250 people per village. It will be no more than 1,250 between the 5 villages planned. The golems I've requested won't be free for a little while, though, so it will probably take until the end of the year before we can clear all the space and structure the terraces and foundations. Construction will be completed in the winter while the fields are being prepared at the same time. What about your port town? I recall that most of your ambitions lie here. I'm uncertain how quickly that will progress, to be honest. My hope is an additional 1,000 tenants by this time next year. It's on the small side for a town, but that should be more than enough to include Warden's Vale as a destination. Though having the river is quite a boon, you're still isolated for the time being, having only a single ship. If anything happens to it, you'll be sunk. Are you certain, my lady? Ludmilla frowned. Wouldn't that seem like I'm taking advantage of my position as part of the staff for this project? They might harbor some feelings on the matter, Lady Shiltir shrugged. But considering that you're basically 100% of my tax revenue and those taxes are going straight into the transportation network, I hardly think such complaints would be justified. Also, the idea that you are considered important enough to include as part of the major transport routes will help you attract people faster. No, it might, Ludmilla admitted. You are correct, I think. The misplaced humility you mentioned is a lot harder to keep in check than it seems. As long as you're learning what is appropriate. The faster your domain grows, the more of your taxes I can put to work on this project. Speaking of which, you never did specify just how much these taxes were. Ludmilla realized that she hadn't, and reorganized the thoughts she had originally put together for the proposal. Taking a sip of tea, she launched into a summary of the state of her finances. Tenant shares, undead labor, undead security and various costs involving administration, maintenance and fees will take up 40% of my total revenues. If you don't mind, I would like to ask for a tax rate of 10% for the time being. The remaining half of my revenues can be turned directly towards further development of industries in my fief. My revenues are purely from commodities that are directly affected by the existence of undead labor, so next season I imagine they will be significantly diminished due to the abundance of it throughout the Sorcerer's Kingdom. I have no idea what these numbers mean, Lady Shiltier stated flatly. I haven't ever received taxes before. Is 10% a small amount? If it was one of the more developed territories, yes, Ludmilla said. A 20 to 40% tax on domain revenues is more along the lines of what the other nobles see. This is in addition to trade taxes, tolls and any additional measures raised by their liege. As a border territory, we actually received a small stipend rather than a tax, to maintain security along our part of the frontier. This security is, for the most part, maintained by His Majesty's armies, which are leased by every noble now, though their organization is still mostly up to each noble to handle. I determined that I should be paying at least some taxes, with this being the case. I see, so you want to stay ahead of the falling prices for your goods by investing into industries that will not be adversely affected by the markets being flooded by undead labor. I believe you mentioned this some time ago? That's exactly correct, Ludmilla nodded. If I don't have the capital to invest in new industries, I will be at the mercy of the plummeting price of basic commodities over the next few years. Revenues will collapse in line with the markets for these goods, so taxes will similarly become poor if nothing is done. This is something you're better at than I am, so I'll leave it to you. Thank you, my lady. Hopefully I am able to manage things well and bring prosperity to my fief, though I should at least build something to accommodate visiting frost dragons. They'd probably be perfectly happy layering up in these mountains somewhere, Lady Shiltier said. The main thing they seem to complain about is the lack of space in the city. You might want to make sure they are somewhere your ability can reach them when they're resting, just in case. I will send one of my vampire brides over once they are done working up north with the dwarven migration. Rather than relying on the elder liches who reported to the central administration, Lady Shiltier had opted to post her vampire brides in the offices of the transportation network instead. Ludmilla had no idea how many she actually had, but her liege assured her that there were enough for what was planned so far. I'm not sure what sort of accommodations are appropriate for one of your handmaidens, Ludmilla said. My laborers will still be busy with the farming village, so there's little in the way of construction going on in the port, but I have 2 extra beds here in my manor if she doesn't mind. It's not as if they need to sleep. Lady Shiltier turned her head to look at the 4 beds tightly arranged to the side. A small desk and room to organize parcels is fine until you can set up a proper office for her. I can place a desk in front of the manor, then. She can use my hall to store parcels. Does that sound all right? It should do. What about food? There won't be a need for any. She'll have something brought from home if she feels like having something. The arrangements will be seen to before her arrival, Ludmilla said. There won't be any friction between your servants and those of the administration, will there? It's not unheard of for human political factions to experience such things. I don't think it's likely to happen, Lady Shiltier replied, but if anything does, it will be from Albedo's side, maybe something along the lines of petty administrative harassment. The vampire bride will be instructed to keep to her own business with the transportation service. She'll also know who you are, so she will heed what you say in matters related to your duties. I'll be counting on you to keep things in order if anything does happen. I will do my best to keep the peace, my lady, Ludmilla nodded. Don't kill her though, the new one won't have the same training, so we'd be losing all of her work experience from the dwarven migration. It would be difficult for me to justify such a thing if she's just working as a logistics officer. I don't think I could harm her anyways. That's a good point. Still, other things can happen, and she'll be in your care. Of course, my lady, Ludmilla said. Was there anything else you could think of for this evening? Not particularly, Lady Shiltier tapped her lip lightly with a finger. It's late enough that I've dodged all of the banal events Albedo has probably organized. I will speak to a few people on some of the things we've discussed today and see if I can come up with anything to improve on what's already planned. Ludmilla escorted Lady Sheltier through the hall of the manor and back outdoors. Night blanketed the barony in a canopy of stars, and no signs of activity could be seen or heard over the village. The Death Knight with its squire zombie standing guard at the door stood at attention as Lady Sheltier stepped out and onto the lane. "Hanzo," Lady Sheltier said. A familiar, lithe figure wrapped in some sort of black uniform stepped out of the shadows. Ludmilla did not have even an inkling of its presence before it revealed itself. "Gather the others," her liege instructed. "We're headed home." The Hanzo dashed away, its form wavering in her sight as it used some unknown ability that was foiled by her talent. It was less than a second before it disappeared around the hill. Ludmilla turned back to address Lady Sheltier as they waited. "When will we next meet?" she asked. "I will return the day after tomorrow, 2 hours before noon. I have to check up on a few things in the meanwhile, and I believe you said you had some catching up to do here. Cocytus should be back at the lake by then, so I'll see if I can arrange the meeting that he wanted." "Should I be making any preparations for this meeting?" Ludmilla asked. Not that I can think of," Lady Sheltier answered. "I still have no idea what he wants, only that he is interested in meeting you specifically. Given his nature, I can't imagine it's anything bad. He may just be curious what human warrior vassals are like, as he is a warrior vassal himself. I hope I do not disappoint him. I will see what I can do about preparing a presentable appearance, at least." The Hanzo returned, lining up along the village lane with 4 more of its fellows. Lady Sheltier opened a gate and looked around one last time. "I'll be off now," Lady Sheltier said. "I will contact you if anything comes up, Lady Zaradnik." Ludmilla spread her skirts and dipped her head in a curtsy. "Have a pleasant night, my lady." Lady Sheltier disappeared into the portal, followed by her escorts. The gate over the village lane closed silently, and Ludmilla was left standing in the cool wind with Amelia at her side. They returned into the manor to prepare for the night, and it was only until after they both lay in their respective beds that Ludmilla spoke. "Thank you for your hard work today, Amelia." "It wasn't a problem, my lady," Amelia replied. "I am your lady's maid, after all." "We were at it for hours. It must have been tiring for you, having a member of the royal court suddenly appear and all." The sound of rustling sheets came from the side before her maid turned in her bed to respond. "Just a little bit, perhaps. Kept worrying about 1,000 little things, and then there was the village stew. Not that it's bad, I think it's better than most of the food served in the city, actually." "I understand what you mean," Ludmilla smiled. "I was worrying about all those same things as well." "Really? It didn't actually seem that way, my lady. I mean, you've gotten so much closer with Lady Sheltier." "I have, haven't I? I guess most of the difference is from my end. She's never displayed the same level of formality when we're not in a public setting, and I've always felt like she's been trying to draw me closer to her for some reason." "Why is that?" "I think you've heard a part of it this evening. In at least some ways, she feels that we are somewhat alike. When she interacts with those she feels familiar with, she barely seems a powerful member of the royal court at all, especially when she is with Lady Aura or Lord Mayor. Whenever I see them together it feels like they are like a boisterous family more than anything else. They are nothing like the haughty, cold, high lords that I imagined those in their position would be. While she may appear to act the part to those who look in from the outside, Lady Sheltier is actually possessed of a pure and passionate character, embracing the intimacy of those she becomes comfortable with. That same character also meant that those on the wrong end of her convictions were met with a decisive outcome, but Ludmilla thought this an admirable quality as well. The sound of sheets rustling came from the side again, followed by a long sigh. Ludmilla turned her head to see Amelia staring up at the rough stone ceiling. "What's wrong?" Ludmilla asked. "I didn't know," Amelia muttered. "You didn't know what?" "They're undead," Amelia moaned. "I didn't even realize it until today. Lady Sheltier and her handmaidens, they're all vampires, aren't they?" "Yes," Ludmilla replied. "Though I figured with all the time you spent together with them that day you'd have noticed." Amelia continued in pained tones, "You know, On the day when we first went out into the city, I kept cowering away from all the death knights and things that were obviously undead, but I felt perfectly fine around them. Then, when we started riding around, I talked about how frightening all the undead were around the city. I thought that they must have felt the same way. How can I bring myself to face them now? I must have sounded terrible. Did they say anything about it? They didn't reply to that at all, but they did eventually open up as we found things of common interest to talk about. While you were away out west, I saw one of them on the street and just happily called out to her. When I mentioned that I was going around visiting the boutiques of the city, she seemed interested in what sort of fashions were on offer, so we just went around all day planning out your wardrobe. At least a quarter of the ideas must have been from her. Ludmilla recalled the sheer fabrics of the vampire bride's scant garments. I hope I'm going to be able to wear these outfits without needing to hide under a box. There shouldn't be anything to worry about. They're all very tasteful, and the touches she made were quite light. They have the glowy red eyes and everything too. I didn't want to inadvertently insult them by bringing it up, and then I just ended up assuming it was dark vision or something. How should I apologize, my lady? Lady Sheltier never mentioned any grievances from her handmaidens. They don't seem the type to complain, Amelia said, and it's not uncommon for servants to hold in a lot of things. Maybe I can offer them some clothing, maybe blood? That might not be a good idea, Ludmilla replied. Don't you get turned into a vampire if one bites you? What about a bottle then? I could just collect some and it will clot and dry up. While I am not a vampire, that doesn't sound very appetizing at all. A dissatisfied sound rose from Amelia, and she tossed about again. I will ask Lady Sheltier what they might like as gifts, Ludmilla said. Until then, please don't do anything crazy. I'm not sure how the migrants would feel if they saw a manor painted with blood. We should get some rest. We'll be having another long day tomorrow. Yes, my lady, Amelia replied. The undead, they're not so bad, are they? Those of the Sorceress Kingdom are not. Some of them I even prefer over a lot of what we humans have to offer. Just don't run around trying to get along with the ones that pop up on their own, though. They'll still just try to kill you on the spot. The sounds of someone working at the back counter nearby stirred Ludmilla from her rest. She stretched her laziness away and, in doing so, her head poked out partway from under her covers. In the main living space of the manor, she saw Amelia working to prepare breakfast. The rich aroma of breakfast filled the air, and the grey light of dawn cast dim shadows from the hall around the corner. When since have you been up? She asked her maid. 2 hours or so, I think, Amelia answered. When I went out to draw water, Willuvian was already out in front of their place next door. They're still learning their way around here, so I made some breakfast for them. You early risers are all crazy, Ludmilla muttered as she watched her maid lay out bowls of warm stew. Make sure you are getting enough rest. I am usually late to bed and late to rise, but you always try to keep up with me at night. Once the Lynham sisters get used to things around here, you should let them handle their share of the work. I will, my lady, Amelia said. Thank you for your consideration. It might be just a little bit hard to stay in bed with them moving around in here though. Ludmilla winced. She knew her maid did not mean poorly by it, but the comment still brought with it the fresh memory of hosting a member of the royal court in a hole in the ground. Her manor was essentially a combination hall/kitchen/sleeping space that was not that much larger than the other dwellings in the hill. The granite walls, ceilings and floors were hewn straight into the stone. If Lady Sheltier had said anything about this place, Ludmilla said, I would have curled up and died right on the spot. I'm sorry, my lady, Amelia turned contrite. I didn't mean that. Oh, you certainly did. Even I feel that way when outsiders come in. You're right, my lady, I'm still sorry, though. Ludmilla threw back her covers and swung her legs off of the bed, feeling the cool stone of the floor under her feet. There is no need to be, she said. I've lived here all my life, and I won't deny it for what it is. All of the labor I can pull into the domain is being focused on developing that strip of farmland, so please bear with me until next year when we can finally start working on the port town. I have little to complain about, Amelia replied as she completed arranging the last of the meals, and none of it is truly serious. Just 3 months ago I was desperately trying to enter even some insignificant household as a scullery maid with little but a hope and a prayer, and now I'm the lady's maid of a frontier lord. I'm pleased beyond belief to live out what I thought could only be a dream, to play my small part in a grand tale that only ever continues to unfold before my very eyes." Ludmilla shuffled to a stop on the way to the chest of clothes at the foot of her bed. "That's, wow. I hope that I am not slaying any dragons in these dreams of yours. The only ones I know of are on our side." "You never seem to disappoint, my lady," Amelia smiled. "I'm always excited about what will happen next." With that, she picked up the first meal and headed to deliver it next door. Ludmilla shook her head wordlessly before changing into fresh clothing. She thought that the passage of time would have the effect of dampening the fantastically lofty expectations of her maid, but they only seemed to grow instead. After moving over to unlock her cabinet and withdraw several folders, she went over to the counter, tossed a roll of bread into her stew bowl and walked everything out. She peeked out of the hall window before sitting at her desk to review the day's tasks. After completing the morning's preparations, she would head out to the farming village and get all of the petitions that had piled up over the last few weeks out of the way. Following this, she would head out to the logging camp to check on their progress with land clearance. On the way back, she would take a look around to inspect the progress on the village's construction before returning to the port for the evening. It was a deceptively short list that would probably keep her busy until the evening. The door opened, and she looked up. "How is the Lynham family doing?" Ludmilla asked. "Much the same, it seems," Amelia replied, tapping her boots on the doormat. "I don't understand. My lady always seems perfectly healthy in body, yet she's so listless. Laluvian and Willuvian received their training under Miss Veyron around the same time I did, and they were in nowhere near as bad a shape even after their ordeals. When they came into your service, I could see them get better by the day." "As far as I understand," Ludmilla said, "their mother was with House Fassett even before they were granted the county by House Vaself. That would mean that she has been a slave for at least 150 years. I would guess being a slave for what basically amounts to 2 human lifetimes has left quite a mark on her life. Maybe she just needs to slowly recover, or maybe she will never fully return to who she used to be, if she even remembers. Not even her own daughters know who she truly is, or where she is from." Amelia clutched her apron tightly in her fingers as she scowled down at the floor. Clearly, she did not like Ludmilla's assessment. "There must be something we can do for them, my lady," she said. "She must have suffered so much. It's not right that even after she's free, she remains chained to her past." "I do not find it a satisfactory answer either." Ludmilla looked back down to her work. "But I am just a noble, and I know next to nothing about elves. Perhaps the answer will present itself in time." The sound of her maid's steps receded into the back of the manor, and Amelia paced out again with another meal. After delivering breakfast, she came up to the desk with a hairbrush in hand. "Shall I accompany you today, my lady?" Amelia said as she stepped in behind her and started straightening Ludmilla's appearance. "Most of it should be receiving petitions in the village," Ludmilla said, "and going around to make sure everything is proceeding smoothly. It is probably best that you remain here. I will send word if I need anything." "You'll be gone for the entire day?" "I should be home in time for supper," Ludmilla replied. "About a dozen households have been furnished, so, rather than dealing with the petitions themselves, most of my time will be spent trying to ensure that the people have a clearer idea of what's going on for the short term. I will also have to keep an eye out for any potential problems along that vein, especially, these migrants from the interior seem to keep their heads down when it comes to dealing with authority instead of just speaking up properly." "As far as I understand, my lady," Amelia said, "most people are used to dealing with their own village chiefs, and it's those leaders that bring forward problems to the next level of administration. A regular tenant doesn't expect to suddenly appear in front of a noble. The gap is just too wide." All the newer people that came in yesterday were shocked at the realization, and half of them could barely put their sentences together. "Well, their village chief is going to be an elder lich, so if they cannot even speak to another human, I cannot imagine how they will fare with the undead." "I imagine they will do just fine," Amelia said, "once they become used to it. It's more a matter of hierarchy rather than any personal problem with you, my lady. It would be as if I had a question about your wardrobe and found myself asking the Sorcerer King instead. It just feels awkward and entirely out of place, leaving you wondering if you should really be there or not, wasting an important person's time. I still want to knock them out of this docile nature of theirs, Ludmilla muttered. Frontier citizens should not be so timid. If there are problems, they should communicate them. It is not as if they are enemies. This attitude you desire for your people might be beneficial for frontier life, my lady, Amelia admitted, but what happens when the domain has more people? A household is kept in order because the junior staff report to the senior staff, and those senior staff will only approach the head of the household if an issue requires their attention. I can't imagine everyone directly coming to you with their problems when there are thousands of families in the fief. We will have enough administrative assistants to handle that by the time it gets to that point. I just meant that they shouldn't fear communicating any problems they might have. Speaking of which, have you noticed anything in the village here that needs to be addressed, Amelia? Not much, to be honest. Most of the people just seem to be waiting to be called to move into their new homes. The children around the village keep finding strange things to do with the skeletons, though. Strange things? Yes, just this morning before you woke up they were making them dance in a circle. They had a small crowd watching by the time I came across them. Recalling the request to be allowed to paint the undead laborers, the odd image of colorful skeletons dancing in a circle arose in her mind. She waved the ridiculous thought away. As long as they aren't doing anything dangerous, I suppose, Ludmilla told her. The more comfortable they are with the undead laborers, the better. Who knows, they may figure out some useful things along the way. I will let the people in the harbor know your intentions, my lady, Amelia said, then paused in thought. You know, it's only a matter of time before the boys start using them as soldiers to have battles with. You are absolutely right about that. They should hold off until I can investigate how safe it is myself. Something like that seems like it could go any number of ways. Ludmilla didn't actually think it was a bad thing. It meant that the next generation might possibly produce commanders who could assist with the security of the domain, or even find a place in the Sorceress Kingdom's armies. She already had loose plans to raise new rangers for both purposes, but if she could train an officer corps that could increase the performance of the nation's undead armies, the vague idea that the town could support an institution which carried forward the militant traditions of Warden's Vale made the possibility that much closer to grasp. In addition, it would further increase her fief's value to the Sorceress Kingdom, creating yet another unique industry. Maybe it was even possible to secure a portion of the national budget to develop it if she could prove her own usefulness to the royal court. Is something the matter, my lady? Amelia asked after several moments of silence. Not particularly, I was just thinking about something, Ludmilla answered. Do you think that most of the children you've seen will follow in the footsteps of their parents? I'm probably not the best person to ask about that, considering my own path, Amelia frowned. I suppose that it would depend on what their family does, and whether there's room for opportunity. Since you're planning on developing 5 farming villages in total, I would imagine that not everyone would be able to become a farmer when the undead labor reduces the need for manpower so drastically. Those people would have to move into the town you're planning here. I think that was the idea, anyways. That was the basic idea. It should still take a while to populate all the villages, but I am trying to figure out whether I need to develop the town more rapidly than expected. I will have a population with basic education entering the town, but aside from their journeymen, I will still need ways to train the ones who are not. I still have not figured out what sort of industries would be best suited for this port. I'm just a weaver's daughter, my lady, Amelia apologized. The fibers extracted from the marsh plants are quite sturdy, but, while they are exceedingly abundant, they're only suited for plain textiles at best, so I'm uncertain whether they are worth exporting. That's the only thing I can really think of in terms of what can be done here. Please stand when it is convenient for you. I need to check over your dress. Ludmilla rose and absently stepped out into the open area of the hall as she mulled over things. She still had no real exports aside from excess agricultural produce every harvest, commodities that were bound to collapse in value over the next few years, if not all at once. There were many ideas that were promising, but still none that she could yet consider a solid anchor for the fief's economy. Her saving grace was that they were mostly self-sufficient now, meaning that she had some leeway in experimentation using her available tax revenues. Amelia's hands moved lightly over Ludmilla's outfit as her maid continued her work. The dress was one of the first that her lady's maid had ordered from the city. She had actually located the shop that had designed last year's outfit and had them recreated with slight changes. It had been adjusted to fit her slender proportions better, and the materials were more suited to the rough conditions that they would be exposed to in Warden's Vale. The overall image it presented, as well as how the various parts of it worked, had also been improved upon, altered to match the strange image that Amelia always seemed to attribute to her. It felt like she could literally fight in the thing. The effect was striking. Even in the city when she had wandered around to test it out briefly, she was clearly recognizable in the crowded streets of the city as some sort of gallant noble figure. It felt that starry-eyed looks followed her wherever she went and, being trained to not attract attention as a ranger, it was awkward in more ways than one. "All right, it looks like we're good here." Amelia rose and circled around Ludmilla one more time, peering carefully over her form. She stopped with her hands on her hips and nodded to herself with a satisfied look. "Will there be anything else, my lady?" "No, I should really get going if I want to come back while dinner is still fresh," Ludmilla said. "If anything happens, let me know right away." Gathering all of her work on the desk into a bag, she slung it over her shoulder and made her way towards the door. "I will, my lady," Amelia curtsied. "Have a safe journey." The sounds of village life greeted Ludmilla as she stepped out of the manor and into the shadows of the high cliffs. The steady ring of hammer on anvil punctuated the air, while gusts of wind periodically drowned out all else. To her right, the home where the Lynham family dwelled was silent, door closed, but curtains drawn open. Deciding against interrupting their breakfast, she walked down the lane until she reached the warehouse and stepped into its open door. "Greetings, Lady Zaradnik." Jeeves' cheerful voice greeted her as she crossed the threshold, and she felt herself smile in response. The miniature skeleton merchant bowed respectfully and awaited her reply. "How have things been for the past day?" she asked. "Mostly the same, mostly." He looked up at her and tapped a bony finger on his clipboard. "I did receive several requests for dyes, though. There are none available in our inventories, as far as I am aware." "You are not wrong," Ludmilla told him. "The requests are probably the result of yesterday's petitions. If anyone else asks, let them know that the orders will be sent to Ranthal this morning, so they should arrive within a week or so. Speaking of which, have you seen Nonna? I need her to get these documents scribed in the city manor." "Yes, she went to review the timber inventories down on the flats," Jeeves replied. "The ship should arrive sometime in the morning tomorrow, so she had one of the woodsmen come down with the latest delivery from the logging camp to ensure that everything is in order beforehand. That was a while ago, so she should be finishing up any time soon." "I should take a quick look around the village before she's done," Ludmilla said. "Do you have anything else that requires my attention?" "That should be everything," Jeeves bowed again. "Have a pleasant day, my lady." Returning outside, Ludmilla tried her best to remain inconspicuous as she wandered up and down the village lanes. She found that, unless someone came quite close, no one seemed to notice her presence. She wasn't sure if it was because it was still gloomy outside in the shade of the mountains to the east or if her dress really wasn't as flashy as she thought it was. On the other hand, Clara's observation about how sneaky she had become might have had a measure of truth to them. People occasionally came up and down the path. Those that seemed to be on errands had skeletons following them. Several homes had groups of people gathered about, chatting amongst themselves. Unless they had been slated as permanent residents of the harbor, most of the migrants would have nothing to do aside from attending to family chores or getting used to life in her fief until they moved out to the villages. The waiting time until they moved into their new homes in the farming village was a week at most, so, to Ludmilla, it didn't seem too long or short of a period to become accustomed to some of the new ideas presented in the Sorceress Kingdom. Following several minutes of wandering about, she found herself at the crest of the hill, standing amongst the stones of the village shrine. The space was kept well maintained by the migrants who came to offer their supplications, and the surface of the stony hilltop was kept as clean as could be expected. Her gaze paused at each representation of the 6 great gods, and Ludmilla wondered how she was doing in their eyes. According to Bishop Osteen, the nobles were in the best position to influence matters of the realm and secure a place for humanity in the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Both she and Clara thought that their activities in the past 2 months had helped to achieve those ends. For a noble of Riestais, the lines were clear and understandable, thus easy to observe and work within. As a noble of the Sorceress Kingdom, however, she was constantly aware of the notion that the lines themselves could shift and change with little warning. A quiet battle had started with this realization, one to ensure that any changes in the Sorceress Kingdom did not have any adverse implications for humanity and her faith. For the time being, the faith of the 6 great gods and their emphasis on the collective destiny of humanity resulted in many values which overlapped with those of the new administration. Regardless of their station, everyone had roles in which they strove to excel in, and all roles held inherent worth in a vast system that drove growth and progress. The continued alignment of these values was crucial to survival in the Sorceress Kingdom. After performing her devotions, she shouldered her bag again and turned back around to find Nonna waiting below. "Have there been any issues with outbound shipments?" Ludmilla asked as she handed over her orders to the Elder Lich. "If there are any improvements that should be considered, we should be experimenting with their implementation before the harvest cements our schedule." "We've long maximized the usage of cargo space in the ship," Nonna replied. "Obtaining new vessels for transportation along the river, or somehow improving on existing cargo capacity are the only apparent options from here. The coming harvest will present difficulties if nothing is done to improve our tonnage." Ludmilla sighed as they made their way to the village entrance. The problem of cargo capacity was a huge one for her fief. Once the harvest was in, it would take their sole vessel over 3 months to deliver all of their excess produce to Call-in Harbor. This meant that any other exports through the river effectively ceased unless they could construct or secure another vessel somehow. She wasn't the only one experiencing issues with transporting the harvest. If anything, the fiefs with expansive agricultural development had it far worse. The explosion in productivity meant that the existing logistics were woefully insufficient. Even with the availability of solitas to draw freight non-stop day and night, the vehicles for said freight were still limited in capacity and could only handle slow speeds. Leanne had been buried in orders for new wagons, and she didn't have enough raw materials or labor to keep up with the demand. Even the addition of frost dragons were a pittance in comparison to the sheer volume of produce that would be harvested. According to Leanne, it would take a year or so until they had enough vehicles to properly transport each harvest, provided that additional lands were not cultivated. For Ludmilla's part, she needed a dozen or so new vessels once all of the new villages were working. "Maybe with the border to the Empire open now," she muttered, "we can find a shipwright from the north. I have no idea when I would have the time for that sort of trip, though." Winding her way back down the lane, Ludmilla decided to try hopping down the nearest terrace. It turned out to be remarkably easy, so she did so the rest of the way until she was at the base of the village and headed down a hillside towards the bridge. Making her way across, she spotted several sections of new wood where the more dubious portions of the old structure had been replaced. It was a temporary measure, though. The entire bridge would need to be torn down and a stone structure built to handle the increased traffic it would eventually see. The fief had seen a remarkable amount of change in the past 2 months, yet it always felt that the change was not fast enough. Not enough capital, not enough labor, not enough time, seemed to have become the tune she was constantly made to dance to ever since she started on the development of her domain. On paper, she knew that each successive village completed would lead to a larger labor pool available to work on the next stage of development, but she always had a sneaking suspicion in the back of her mind that there was something she had missed, or something she could do better. That she was regularly made aware of shortfalls and oversights did not help much with her confidence. She covered the 10 kilometers from the bridge crossing to the village at a leisurely jog, arriving within 50 minutes. Considering she had done so in a dress, though admittedly it was clearly designed for her activities in mind, it felt nothing more than astonishing, and she didn't even feel taxed by the end. In her childhood, Ludmilla was always amazed that her father and mother could perform such feats, but it seemed that she had finally caught up with them. The new village loomed ahead, its 2 parts built straddling the road. The road remained level with the surrounding field, carving a 20-meter wide gap between the common and warehouse areas. The entire area was formerly level with the road, and the village foundation an impossibility but for the assistance of Lord Mayor. After witnessing what he was capable of with the adventurer training area and Clara employing him to reshape the terrain for her new harbor, Ludmilla had come up with a similarly fantastical plan for many parts of her domain. Lord Mayor was quite interested in what she was doing to reshape the Vale, so he had readily agreed to help in his curiosity over the outcome. He raised the base of the new village from seemingly nothing, even fashioning the sewer system that flowed beneath. Once he was satisfied with the result, which ended up taking a whole afternoon of alterations, he promised to return when he was needed again and to see what the end result looked like. He appeared to have a great passion for shaping and building things, and his zeal in related activities was readily apparent. So far, the buildings of the village rose on what resembled a miniature plateau standing 4 meters over the fields surrounding it. The stone walls of the 2 forts that straddled the road would rise an additional 4 meters, creating an imposing barrier that would be extremely difficult to assail in a conventional manner. The walls, with their battlements and towers, would come after the buildings in the interior had been mostly completed, so, for the time being, it was a curious-looking collection of buildings rising on an equally curious-looking outcropping of stone. She ascended the long stone ramp to the common area, passing by the Death Knight standing guard at the entrance, and was greeted with the sight of people busy with the village's ongoing construction. Men, women and children were busy at work in the market square, which was currently being used as a construction yard. Masons adjusted blocks of stone for fitting while carpenters fashioned frames, paneling, rails, furniture and other items. A kiln had been set up, and pallets nearby were filled with cinnabar-colored roofing tiles. Laborers helping to put together the stone homes that lined the village streets appeared occasionally to cart away a load of one thing or another to their respective construction sites. Ludmilla thought she could sneak past the market area to look around unharassed, except nearly everyone noticed the more than conspicuous elder lich following behind her, which, in turn, drew their attention to their liege. The foreman overseeing the yard stopped what he was doing and quickly walked up to them. "Good morning, Lady Zaradnik," he said with a slight bow. "You've been away for a while, just come in?" "With yesterday's arrivals," she replied. "There is a lot of catching up to do, so here I am." "So you are, my lady," he somehow nodded using half of his body. "First floor of the Lich Tower's part way done, so you won't have to bake in the sun holding court like last time. I will be readying things there, then. Was there anything urgent that you needed addressed while you have my attention?" Nope," he replied. "It's about as steady gets. Weather's perfect and there isn't much happening in the way of distractions. There was that nasty-looking dummy that popped up the other day, but a Death Knight took care of it real quick. Didn't even know what happened until the entire thing was over, so work in the village didn't even stop." A young girl walked past them with an emerald forest slime on her head. They were a common sight in the fief, and Ludmilla had issued instructions for one to be delivered per household and deposited into the sewers for waste management. "Is that really safe?" the foreman said as his gaze followed the girl and her slime. "I did that when I was a little girl too," Ludmilla replied. "They are monsters, but not the sort of monster that people have in mind when they think about them. They are quite placid, as long as they do not think they are being threatened. I would say that they are even more docile than most of the livestock people keep. If you communicate your intent to them, they will let you know whether it is agreeable or not." "Communicate, with a slime," the foreman's voice was flat. "The laws of our world that allow us to speak with others will work regardless of species, if they are capable of comprehending the meaning of what you say, that is. Despite their simple appearance, the slimes here are also quite intelligent in their own way." In the bright sunlight, the slime looked like the shimmering jewel that was its namesake. The blob jiggled along with the girl's steps, seemingly content with sitting on her head. They disappeared behind the corner of a house, and Ludmilla returned to the business at hand. "I hope I will not be interrupting anything major once I start pulling people in for their petitions," Ludmilla said to the foreman. "We're your subjects, my lady," he shrugged. "I ain't never seen no noble worried about interrupting anything before." "It is going to be busy for a very long time," Ludmilla said, "and small interruptions have a way of adding up. I will put together a schedule for you to work around with in advance." "All right, just let me know when you're ready." Leaving the foreman to his duties, she walked into the nearby entrance of the Lich Tower. Though it was to be the largest building in the village's common area, it shared the same, simple style as the other buildings around the market square. The portion of the first floor constructed so far amounted to the basic structure of the office and the wings attached to it. There was still no floorboards or furniture, though someone had placed a single stool in the space for some reason. Maybe they had put it there for her? The base of the tower and the stairwell which spiraled up the inside of it were also there. "Does the office area look large enough to work with?" she asked Nonna. "It is much more than sufficient," the elder lich replied. I have mentioned that buildings in this village seem overly excessive. The administrative office is no exception. Once they furnish it, it should look a lot smaller. All one requires is a desk, Nana said. It does not hurt to have a comfortable, open space to work in. Besides, making everything tiny would create a meager impression for the administration. It is hardly excessive. When it came to her own workspace, Nana did not care for anything beyond the bare minimum of functionality. Be it a corner of a warehouse or just standing out on the pier, comfort and appearance were non-factors. Considering that most of the citizens which she helped to administer certainly did care for appearances, it seemed an awkward blind spot to have for someone in her position. Considering how you still feel this way about a lot of things, Ludmilla said, I am worried how the new administrator here will get along with the villagers. Our priority is a smoothly functioning bureaucracy, Nana sniffed. Getting along can come later. At least you recognize that it helps. The elder liches coming in will probably be freshly trained with no experience. They will be counting on your guidance to optimize their performance here. I hardly see what that has to do with anything we've just discussed. I think you have improved on this quite a bit yourself, Nana. Ludmilla looked over at the elder lich from her stool. You've changed quite a bit from when I first met you. Perhaps that will be made apparent when the others arrive.